Rewritten script, improved version. Fire viral hook, midnight to 0:15. You complain about the cold with your heating and your North Face layers. But could you survive when rivers froze solid for months and a single night exposed meant death? Medieval peasants didn't just survive the little ice age. They outsmarted the wealthy who had all the resources. Their secret? It's about to blow your mind. Act I. The problem when winter became lethal. When the little ice age struck medieval Europe, peasants faced a brutal and unprecedented reality. Temperatures plummeted so drastically that rivers transformed into highways of ice for months on end. Crops failed year after year. Starvation lurked in every corner. But here's what's fascinating. They didn't just curl up and wait to become medieval popsicles. They got creative. And that creativity marks the difference between a name on an unmarked grave and a survival story that echoes through centuries. Act 2. The first line of defense, the heart of fire. The open hearth became their lifeline. And forget those elegant fireplaces you see in castles. We're talking about a simple fire pit, right in the center of their one-room dwellings. Smoke everywhere, sparks flying like crazed fireflies. Yet this crude setup could heat a space up to 50 degrees warmer than the bone-chilling air outside. That difference isn't trivial. It's literally the line between surviving and becoming a winter casualty. Wood was the gold standard for fuel. But when forests became as scarce as honest politicians, peasants turned to whatever burned. Peat from bogs worked beautifully. Slow burning and surprisingly effective. Dried animal dung? Absolutely. Your modern sensibilities might wrinkle at the thought. But cow patties burned longer than most woods and generated decent heat. Makes sense, right? When survival is at stake. Pride is a luxury you can't afford. Now, here's the elephant in the room. Or rather, the fire hazard in the cottage. These open hearths set directly under thatched roofs made of straw and reeds. One stray ember and whoosh, there goes the neighborhood. Literally. But peasants had no choice. Better to risk a house fire than guarantee freezing to death. It's one of those impossible decisions that reveals the harshness of their reality. Act 3. The real genius, shared warmth. But the real genius wasn't just about staying warm. It was about staying together. The hearth naturally became the family gathering spot. Everyone huddled around that precious heat source, sharing stories, mending clothes, preparing food. Body heat multiplied when people clustered together. 6 people around a fire generated way more warmth than 6 people scattered throughout a cold cottage. Most peasant homes didn't even have proper chimneys. Instead, they relied on smoke holes cut into the roof or walls. Terrible for heat retention, you'd think. And you'd be right, but necessary for not suffocating everyone inside. The trade-off was brutal. Lose heat to prevent smoke poisoning or keep the heat and risk passing out from carbon monoxide. Medieval life was full of these delightful choices. The weird part is how this primitive heating system actually worked better than you'd expect. The constant fire meant someone always tended it, keeping temperatures relatively stable throughout those endless winter nights. No thermostats, no gas bills, just vigilant fire watching and a steady supply of whatever would burn. And here's what's fascinating. This wasn't just about survival. That central hearth shaped entire family dynamics, work schedules, and social structures. Everything revolved around keeping that fire alive. Act 4. The second skin, the forgotten art of layering. Speaking of staying alive, warmth wasn't just about the fire. Medieval peasants discovered that what they wrapped around their bodies mattered just as much as what burned in their hearths. When the Little Ice Age hit, they couldn't just crank up a thermostat or grab a heated jacket from their closet. They had to get creative with what they wore. And boy, did they master the art of layering long before it became a trend at outdoor gear stores. The secret weapon, wool, lots and lots of wool. Medieval folks understood something that modern hikers learned the hard way. Cotton kills, but wool saves lives. A person wearing wool keeps about 70% of their body heat, even when the fabric gets soaking wet. It's like having a built-in heating system that works in a downpour. Try doing that with your favorite cotton hoodie, and you'll be shivering like a wet chihuahua. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't just throw on one thick woolen sweater and call it a day. That would be amateur hour. Instead, They wore multiple thin layers of wool, creating air pockets that trapped heat like tiny, invisible furnaces between each piece of clothing. The base layer was usually linen, not wool. Makes sense, right? Linen absorbs sweat while keeping the skin relatively dry. Nobody wants to marinate in their own moisture when it's freezing outside. That's a recipe for hypothermia with a side of misery. Then came the wool layers. 2, 3, sometimes 4 different woolen garments stacked on top of each other. Medieval tailors were smart about this too. They made clothes slightly bigger during winter months, specifically to accommodate all that extra padding without turning people into walking marshmallows who couldn't move their arms. Let's not forget the piece de resistance, the long woolen hooded cape called a chaperon. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a Canada Goose parka, minus the designer price tag and social media bragging rights. These bad boys covered everything from head to toe and could double as blankets when needed. But wait, there's more. Some particularly inventive peasants stuffed their clothes with straw, moss, or even dried grass for extra insulation. Imagine walking around with a scarecrow's wardrobe stuffed inside your actual clothes. Not exactly high fashion, but when your alternative is freezing to death, style takes a backseat to survival. The really clever part, they could add or remove layers as the day warmed up or cooled down. Medieval climate control at its finest. And here's a fun fact that'll make you appreciate modern laundry services. All these wool layers meant medieval people were walking around in what was essentially a portable sauna. The smell alone could probably melt snow. Act V, the fortress architecture for survival. While layering kept their bodies warm, peasants knew that clothes were only part of the equation. The real challenge was keeping their homes heated when winter winds started howling through every crack and crevice. Medieval peasants weren't architects, but they understood something modern homeowners spend thousands learning. Smart design beats expensive heating systems every time. Their homes might look humble from the outside, but every wall, window, and floor served a purpose in the battle against freezing temperatures. Those thick walls weren't just for show, made from wattle and daub, basically sticks, mud, and whatever else was handy. They created a barrier that trapped heat like a medieval thermos bottle. Think of it as nature's insulation, except it cost nothing and used materials from the backyard. The walls could be up to 2 feet thick in some regions, which is thicker than most modern homes today. But here's where peasants got really clever. Low ceilings. While we dream of cathedral ceilings and open floor plans, medieval folks knew that heating a smaller space made perfect sense. Heat rises, so why waste it on empty air above your head? A ceiling just 7 feet high meant less volume to warm, and more heat staying where people actually lived and breathed. Windows presented a real puzzle, though. You needed light, but glass was luxury item number 1, more expensive than a month's worth of food. So peasants got creative with shutters and oilcloth coverings. These weren't just barriers against cold air. They were adjustable heating systems. Sunny day? Open them up and let natural warmth flood in. Blizzard conditions? Seal everything tight and rely on the fire. This flexibility gave them control over their indoor climate in ways that fixed glass windows never could. Floor planning was equally strategic. Sleeping areas were positioned closest to the hearth, obviously, but the genius move was keeping livestock on the ground floor during winter. Cows, goats, and chickens generated surprising amounts of body heat, and having them downstairs created a natural heating system for the living quarters above. Yes, it smelled like a barn, but it beat freezing to death, which was a constant alternative looming over every decision. Act 6. The living heaters, animals as survival partners. Speaking of livestock, let's talk about the 4-legged heating systems that made winter survival possible. Medieval peasants weren't sentimental about their animals. These creatures weren't pets. They were multi-purpose survival tools. A cow wasn't just a milk producer. It was a 700-pound space heater that also happened to provide dairy. The strategy was brilliantly simple. Bring the animals inside during the worst cold snaps, not into the main living area. Obviously, that would be chaos. But close enough that their body heat radiated through walls and floors, warming the human quarters above or adjacent. Chickens proved particularly valuable. Beyond eggs, these birds generated enough heat in their collective roosts to warm entire sections of homes. Plus, their droppings could be dried and burned as fuel. Every part of the system connected to every other part. Dogs earned their keep too. The term three-dog night wasn't just colorful language. It was a literal measurement of cold. The more dogs you needed in your bed to avoid freezing, the worse the night. Dogs provided warmth, security, and companionship during those endless dark winter months. Even cats, typically valued for pest control, became mobile heat sources. A cat curled up on your lap wasn't just adorable, it was strategic warmth management. Act 7, the enemy within, winning the war against pests. But warmth attracted more than just grateful humans and animals. It drew pests like flies to honey, and medieval peasants knew that vermin could kill just as effectively as cold. Fleas, lice, rats, and mice weren't mere annoyances. They were vectors of disease, thieves of precious food supplies, and sources of constant misery that could break a person's will to survive. The peasant response? Brilliant improvisation. Herb-scattered floors weren't about freshening the air. Certain herbs, rue, pennyroyal, tansy, repelled insects naturally. Walking across these floors released their oils, creating a low-level pest deterrent that worked around the clock. Smart thinking. Considering these folks were sharing space with livestock, the real genius move was keeping the hearth smoky on purpose. Modern homeowners spend thousands on pest control, but medieval peasants just let their fires burn a little dirty. That constant smoke created an environment that flies and mosquitoes couldn't stand. Sure, everyone's eyes watered constantly, but hey, no buzzing insects trying to lay eggs in your food. Cats became the medieval equivalent of security systems. A good Mauser wasn't just a pet. It was a survival tool. These feline employees worked around the clock, keeping rats and mice from stealing precious winter food supplies. Plus, they provided bonus warmth during those three-dog nights we mentioned earlier. But here's where it gets really interesting. Being pest-free wasn't just about comfort. It was literally about staying alive. Every flea bite, every open scratch from constant itching became a potential entry point for infection during those harsh winters. When you're already fighting malnutrition and freezing temperatures, the last thing you need is festering wounds making everything worse. Medieval peasants understood something we've forgotten in our air-conditioned world. Cleanliness and pest control weren't luxuries. They were matters of life and death. Act 8. Fueled within, the forgotten power of food. Speaking of staying warm, all this pest control was just the beginning of their survival strategy. Because once you've got a clean, bug-free space, you need to fill it with the right kind of fuel. And we're not talking about wood for the fire. The real heat came from within. Nothing beats a hot meal when you're freezing your medieval behind off. And peasants during the Little Ice Age knew this better than anyone. Their secret weapon, calories, lots of them. Medieval peasants packed their bellies with thick stews, dense breads, and hearty grains that worked like internal furnaces. These weren't just meals, they were survival fuel. The human body burns through energy like a woodpile when it's cold, and peasants needed every calorie they could get their hands on. But here's where it gets interesting. Beer and ale weren't just for drowning out the misery of another frozen morning. These beverages were caloric powerhouses, delivering liquid warmth straight to the core. Some folks swore alcohol lowered their blood's freezing point. Scientifically questionable? Absolutely. Did it make them feel warmer? You bet. The real genius lay in their preservation methods. Pickled vegetables, salted meats, and fermented foods weren't just about making winter rations last. These techniques concentrated nutrients and maintained essential vitamins that kept bodies functioning when fresh food disappeared under snowdrifts. Then there's the spice situation. Medieval cooks believed certain spices literally heated the body from within. Pepper, ginger, and cinnamon weren't just flavor enhancers. They were considered warming agents. Whether this actually worked or just created a psychological boost, peasants felt toastier after a spice meal. The communal dining setup deserves recognition too. Families huddled around shared bowls and platters, shoulders touching, breath mingling over steaming food. It was like a dinner party where body heat was a guest of honor. Smart positioning meant the youngest and oldest got the warmest spots closest to communal pot. Medieval moms had a rule that sounds familiar even today: eat before you head outside. Loading up on food before venturing into the cold gave peasants internal warmth that lasted hours. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of putting premium fuel in your car before a long winter drive. But let's be honest about the reality here. These weren't gourmet meals. We're talking about whatever could be grown, caught, or scavenged. Turnip stew again? Sure. Barley bread that could double as a doorstop? Why not? The goal wasn't winning any cooking competitions. It was staying alive until spring showed up fashionably late. The beauty of this approach was its simplicity. No fancy equipment needed. No complicated recipes to memorize. Just eat everything you can get your hands on. Make as hot as possible and share the warmth with whoever's sitting next to you. Act 9. Beyond the Walls, Survival in a Frozen World. Of course, eating your way through winter only worked if you had enough food stored up. And when those supplies ran low, peasants had to get really creative about staying warm outdoors. Medieval peasants weren't about to let a little frostbite stop them from earning their daily bread. When stepping outside during the Little Ice Age meant facing temperatures that could freeze your breath mid-sentence, they had to get creative fast. Their footwear game was surprisingly clever. Those wooden clog shoes that looked about as comfortable as walking on tree stumps? Pure genius, actually. What doesn't conduct cold like modern materials do, creating a natural barrier between feet and frozen ground. Think of them as medieval Crocs, minus the questionable fashion choices, but with actual survival benefits. But here's where it gets interesting. These weren't just any wooden shoes. Peasants often stuffed them with straw or moss, essentially creating the world's first insulated boots. The straw could be changed out when it got wet or worn down. Not exactly Nike Air technology, but it kept toes from turning into icicles. Cloaks were the Swiss Army knives of medieval winter wear. During the day, they protected against wind and snow. At night, they transformed into blankets. Need to sit on frozen ground while tending sheep? Instant cushion and insulation. Some of these cloaks were so large they could wrap around a person twice, which was the whole point. Then there's a timing strategy that would make any modern efficiency expert proud. Peasants scheduled their outdoor work around the sun's path, like they were running a medieval corporation. The warmest part of the day, usually between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, became prime time for the heaviest outdoor labor. Makes sense, right? Their hand-warming techniques border on brilliant. Cuff mittens weren't just for keeping fingers warm. They were designed with small openings that allowed people to blow warm breath directly onto their hands. Medieval hand warmers powered by lung capacity alone. Some peasants took it even further. Heated stones from the fireplace became portable heat sources tucked into pockets or wrapped in cloth. These weren't smooth river rocks either. They used specific stones that held heat longer and didn't crack under temperature changes. Trial and error taught them which rocks worked best, though probably after a few explosive failures. The weird part is how they coordinated group activities to maximize warmth. Outdoor work often became communal events with multiple families working together. More bodies meant more shared heat, and rotating positions meant no one person bore the brunt of the cold wind for too long. Even their breathing techniques showed adaptation. Breathing through the nose instead of the mouth helped warm incoming air naturally. They discovered that covering the lower face with cloth created a small warm pocket of air, essentially inventing the medieval face mask centuries before it became trendy. Act X, the ultimate lesson, innovation born from necessity. These weren't just survival tactics. They were innovations born from necessity. When your alternative is freezing to death, human ingenuity finds a way. Their outdoor strategies reveal something remarkable about medieval peasants. They didn't just endure winter. They outsmarted it. Every technique, every adaptation, every clever hack was a middle finger to the brutal cold that tried to kill them. And here's what's truly mind-blowing. They did all this without any of our modern advantages. No weather apps to predict storms. No synthetic fabrics engineered in laboratories. No emergency services to rescue them if things went wrong. Just raw human determination, community cooperation, and centuries of accumulated wisdom passed down from survivor to survivor. The wealthy had castle servants and stockpiles of resources. But the peasants? They had something more valuable. the collective intelligence of desperate people who refuse to die quietly. They innovated, adapted, and survived against odds that would break most modern humans. So the next time you complain about your thermostat being set too low, remember, you're standing on the shoulders of people who conquer winter with nothing but mud walls, wool layers, and an unbreakable will to see another spring. That's not just survival. That's triumph.